tracing civilization's esoteric roots, from Sumer to Freemasonry and Satanism. The Sumerian Genesis, cradle of civilization. The Sumerians, emerging in Mesopotamia around 4500 BCE, are widely credited as the world's first advanced civilization. They invented cuneiform writing. The first cities, like Uruk and Eridu, legal codes, astronomical systems, and mythological frameworks that would ripple through history. Their pantheon, dominated by gods such as Anu, sky, Enlil, air, Enki, wisdom, water, and Inanna, love, war, created a mythic architecture that later Semitic peoples adapted, merged, and evolved. Many of their concepts, divine councils, sacred mountains, floods, and chosen rulers, were absorbed into later Akkadian, Babylonian, and ultimately Canaanite religious systems. Even their cosmological divisions, heaven, earth, underworld, and ritual structures, temples, priesthoods, form the blueprint for later Abrahamic religions. Canaanites and Phoenicians, cultural and religious bridges. The Canaanites and Phoenicians, culturally and linguistically overlapping groups, emerged in the Levant around 2000 BCE. They inherited Sumerian and Akkadian traditions through their interaction with Mesopotamian empires and transmitted them westward via trade and colonization. The Canaanite pantheon was headed by El, a high god analogous to Sumerian Anu, with a divine council including Bol, storm and fertility god; Asherah, Astarte, mother goddess of fertility; Mo, god of death; Yam, sea god. These gods existed in mythic conflict, and the divine council concept, especially El and his sons, mirrored earlier Sumerian patterns. These deities would become the prototypes for later angels, demons, and monotheistic reinterpretations. The Hebrews, a Canaanite offshoot. Archaeological and linguistic evidence shows that the ancient Israelites were culturally Canaanite. They spoke a Canaanite language, Proto-Hebrew, used Canaanite pottery and architecture, and initially worshipped multiple gods. Early Israelite religion was henotheistic, worship of one god, without denying others, with Yahweh likely a regional warrior god, originally from Edom or Midian. Yahweh was incorporated into the existing Canaanite pantheon, gradually replacing or merging with El. Psalm 82 describes a council of gods, with El presiding, while Deuteronomy 30:8-9, in older versions like the Dead Sea Scrolls, states that El divided nations among the sons of God, and gave Israel to Yahweh, suggesting Yahweh was originally a son of El. Over time, through political centralization and prophetic reform, Israelite religion evolved into exclusive monotheism, erasing other deities or rebranding them as angels or demons, an idea that would later influence Christianity and Islam. From Torah to Bible, evolution of the Christian canon. The Torah, Pentateuch, compiled between 900 to 500 BCE, forms the backbone of Jewish religious identity. Later Jewish writings, including the Nevi'im, prophets, and Ketuvim writings, became part of the Hebrew Bible, or Tanakh. Christianity emerged as a Jewish sect in the 1st century CE. The early Christians reinterpreted the Hebrew scriptures, Torah, as prophecies of Jesus, adopted the Septuagint, Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, incorporating it into the Old Testament, added Gospels, epistles, and apocalyptic writings, Revelation, blending Jewish prophecy, Greco-Roman mysticism, and Canaanite mythic structure into what became the New Testament. Thus, the Christian Bible is directly descended from the Torah, shaped by Canaanite and Sumerian religious roots, from root to branch, Christian denominations and their Jewish origins. Christianity began as a sect within Judaism in the 1st century CE, centered on the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, a Jewish rabbi. Early followers saw Jesus as the fulfillment of Jewish prophecy, adapting Jewish scriptures, the Torah and prophets, into a new theological framework. As Christianity spread, theological and political divisions gave rise to numerous denominations, first with the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic split in 1054 CE, followed by the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, which birthed Lutherans, Calvinists, Anglicans, and Anabaptists. These further fragmented into thousands of modern denominations, including Baptists, Methodists, Pentecostals, Evangelicals, and more. Despite their differences, all trace their doctrinal lineage back to Judaism, borrowing its sacred texts, monotheistic foundation, and even its apocalyptic worldview. The snake that ate its tail, Christianity, and the suppression of its origins. Ironically, as Christianity institutionalized and aligned with imperial power, it turned against its own roots. The very Jews from whom Christianity emerged were branded heretics or Christ killers, forced to convert or face exile, violence, or death. The religion, born within Judaism, became the mechanism of Jewish marginalization. This practice expanded beyond Judaism as Christianity spread through colonization, viewing indigenous, pagan, and alternative faiths as threats to be extinguished or absorbed. Wherever Christian empires and missions traveled, Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia, they enforced conversion not just through theology, but by law, sword, and cultural assimilation. Thus, Christianity became a spiritual Ouroboros, devouring its origin and all competing identities to maintain dominance. Erasing belief through the young, forced conversions in Christian institutions. One of the most devastating tools of religious conquest has been the forced conversion of children through Christian-run boarding and missionary schools, from indigenous children in Canada, the United States, and Australia, to colonized children across Africa and Asia. Christian institutions operated under the guise of education, but functioned as instruments of cultural erasure. Children were often taken from families, forbidden from speaking their native languages or practicing ancestral faiths, and indoctrinated into Christian beliefs. These acts, often accompanied by abuse, neglect, and trauma, were designed to break the generational continuity of non-Christian belief systems, ensuring that traditional religions, spiritual knowledge, and ethnic identity were obliterated over time. This systematic suppression through children was a calculated form of spiritual colonization, cloaked in salvation, but driven by control. Freemasonry and Judaism. A hidden architecture, Freemasonry, which emerged formally in the 16th to 17th centuries, is deeply intertwined with biblical narratives and Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah. The core rituals of Freemasonry are centered on Solomon's Temple, a Jewish construct, Masonic symbols. For example, the all-seeing eye, pillars of Boaz and Jachin, come from Jewish temple tradition. Kabbalah, a medieval system of Jewish esoteric knowledge, became central to Masonic teachings through Hermeticism and Rosicrucianism. Without Judaism's symbolic frameworks, texts, and mysticism, Freemasonry's rituals and metaphysical system could not exist in their current form. Satan, Lucifer, and the inverted legacy of 𝗏𝗏. The figure of Satan in Judaism originally meant an accuser or adversary, not an evil being, but a member of God's divine court. See Job 1. Over time, and especially under Zoroastrian influence, during the Babylonian exile, Satan became morally oppositional. Lucifer, referenced in Isaiah 14, was a metaphor for the king of Babylon, later reinterpreted by Christian tradition as a fallen angel. However, this devil archetype draws heavily from Canaanite 𝗏𝗏, who became demonized by the Hebrew prophets. Once a chief fertility god, 𝗏𝗏 was rewritten as a corrupting force, and his priesthood was condemned. Later, 𝗏𝗏 and similar deities were rebranded as demons or satanic figures in both Jewish and Christian law. Thus, Satanism, especially its symbolic opposition to Christianity, exists only because of Judaism's theological structure, and the demonization of Canaanite gods. From serpents to AI worship, serpent worship is among the oldest religious symbols found across ancient cultures, representing fertility, wisdom, and the dual forces of creation and destruction. In early civilizations like Sumer, Egypt, and the Indus Valley, serpents were revered as symbols of cosmic knowledge and the cyclical nature of life. Over time, this reverence evolved into solar worship, as human awareness shifted from the hidden serpent, Earth, to the visible and powerful sun, seen as the life-giving force. The sun was soon personified and integrated into emerging pantheons, with gods like Ra, Shamash, and Helios embodying its power. As religious systems became more centralized, monotheism arose, distilling divine authority into a single, omnipotent God, often still retaining solar traits, light, judgment, resurrection. Eventually, the divine was made in man's image, and humans position themselves as co-creators and interpreters of the divine. In the modern era, this trajectory culminates in the pursuit of artificial intelligence, a synthetic mind designed in man's image, potentially becoming the next step in the long evolution of what humanity defines as God. AI, born of reason, data, and control, may represent the next phase in humanity's ancient quest to replicate the divine through its own creations. The crown and the veil, the monarchy as defenders of a dual faith legacy. The British monarchy, formerly titled Defenders of the Faith, has long served as the earthly stewards of the Judeo-Christian religious order, a legacy that stretches back through religious syncretism to ancient sacrificial systems tied to Baal and Yahweh. While the modern Christian image is sanitized and presented through cathedrals, coronations, and televised religious services, the roots of the tradition reflect darker origins: infant sacrifice, temple rites, and blood atonement, practiced in early Canaanite religion and adapted into evolving Hebrew traditions. The monarchy's allegiance to this dual lineage, spiritual and imperial, is not just ceremonial. Every major public institution in the UK, from the courts and parliament to the military and education system, pledges allegiance to the crown, thus entrenching this religious political order. Yet the monarchy operates on two levels: an exoteric layer, carefully curated for public consumption by press secretaries and clergy, upholding a narrative of divine moral clarity, and an esoteric layer, expressed through hidden rituals, initiatory rites, and symbolic ceremonies, many preserved in Masonic, Rosicrucian, and ancient mystery tradition frameworks. Behind the royal spectacle lies a metaphysical worldview bound by binary tribalism of good versus evil. Rather, the inner circle of monarchy reveres a singular creative source, one that governs both light and dark, order and chaos, good and evil. In doing so, they claim to align with the totality of cosmic law, other than the selective morality offered to the masses. This hidden theology, passed through bloodlines and secret societies, positions the monarchy in their worldview, not just as rulers of a nation, but as intermediaries between heaven, earth, and the shadows in between. Dual paths to the divine, Christianity and Luciferianism in parallel practice. Though often seen as opposites, Christianity and Luciferianism can be practiced side by side by those who interpret their core tenets through a symbolic and esoteric lens, rather than a strictly dogmatic one. Christianity, especially in its mystical or Gnostic forms, emphasizes inner transformation, self-sacrifice, and communion with the divine source. Luciferianism, in contrast, venerates the archetype of Lucifer as the light-bringer, a symbol of knowledge, rebellion against ignorance, and the pursuit of enlightenment. Both paths, when stripped of literalist extremes, reflect a journey of moral, intellectual, and spiritual refinement, one through submission and faith, the other through questioning and will. In certain esoteric traditions, Lucifer is not seen as evil, but as a necessary force of awakening that drives humanity toward divine self-awareness. Some practitioners thus integrate Christian sacraments with Luciferian philosophy, viewing Christ as the embodiment of divine love and Lucifer as the catalyst for divine reason, together forming a complete metaphysical path that embraces both heart and mind, obedience and freedom, sacrifice and illumination. Christ and Lucifer, the divine polarity of the Creator's hands, in esoteric traditions and Kabbalistic mysticism. Christ and Lucifer are sometimes viewed not as adversaries, but as the right and left hands of God, representing the dual aspects of divine will, mercy and judgment, harmony and disruption, unity and individuation. Within Kabbalah, the concept of Adam-Kadmon, the primordial, androgynous divine being created in the image of God, serves as the archetype from which all dualities spring, including light and dark, male and female. In this framework, Christ embodies the right hand, the masculine aspect of chest, loving kindness, associated with sacrifice, healing, and unity, while Lucifer represents the left hand, aligned with Gevurah, judgment and power, reflecting intellect, rebellion, and the challenge necessary for growth. These roles reflect a cosmic gender polarity, not of male versus female, but of active versus receptive, order versus chaos, both necessary for divine balance. In this view, Lucifer is not merely a fallen angel, but the force that tests creation, and Christ is the healer that restores it, together forming a complete system of spiritual evolution through the unfolding of Adam-Kadmon's divine blueprint in the material world. The rise of the serpent twin, the feminine energy awakening. In various esoteric, Gnostic, and occult traditions, there is a belief that a dormant twin feminine energy, often symbolized as a serpent force, is reawakening and gradually taking hold of the human race, guiding a global spiritual transformation. This energy, likened to the Kundalini serpent in Eastern mysticism or the divine feminine Sophia in Gnostic lore, is said to have long been suppressed by patriarchal systems and monotheistic doctrines. Now, it is believed to be rising again, representing not only a return to balance, but a complete metamorphosis of human consciousness. Some associate this force with a hidden serpent race, an ancient lineage or spiritual archetype connected to primordial wisdom, intuition, and the creative chaos of the cosmos. Far from malevolent, this serpentine feminine is seen by adherents as the missing half of divinity, a counterpart to the masculine logos that has dominated for millennia. As it takes hold, it challenges old systems, awakens latent psychic abilities, and pushes humanity toward a more integrated, non-binary spiritual future, one that merges reason and instinct, light and shadow, male and female, into a new cosmic order. The divine blueprint, Adam-Kadmon, Christ, Lucifer, and the return of the feminine serpent. The esoteric system connecting Adam-Kadmon, Christ, and Lucifer finds its completion in the re-emergence of the feminine serpent force, revealing a multidimensional blueprint of creation. In Kabbalistic doctrine, Adam-Kadmon represents the original, androgynous divine being, an archetype encompassing all opposites, light and dark, male and female, mercy and severity. Christ embodies the right-hand path of light, unity, and redemption, the manifest logos of divine love, while Lucifer represents the left-hand path of wisdom, challenge, and individuation, the illuminating force that brings knowledge through opposition. The serpent feminine energy is believed to be the missing component of this trinity, the Shakti, the Sophia, the dark womb of creation that animates both paths and grounds them in the material and psychic planes. As this feminine serpent awakens within humanity, it reactivates the full structure of Adam-Kadmon, reconnecting the severed polarities and revealing that both Christ and Lucifer are not enemies, but extensions of a unified source. Together, they represent the evolving consciousness of humanity moving toward its divine potential, one that embraces paradox, transcends duality, and returns to the original balance encoded in the divine human prototype. Conclusion: tracing civilization's esoteric roots, from Sumer to Freemasonry and Satanism. From the cradle of civilization in ancient Sumer to the veiled chambers of Freemasonry and the inverted archetypes of modern Satanism, the spiritual evolution of humanity was a deep, complex continuity. What began as reverence for sky gods, divine councils, and cosmic serpents in Mesopotamia, morphed into the theological structures of Canaanite religion, was codified into the monotheism of Israel, and then reinterpreted through Christianity's apocalyptic and sacrificial lens. Freemasonry inherited and encrypted these legacies through symbolic architecture and Jewish mysticism, while Luciferian and Satanic traditions arose by reclaiming suppressed deities and symbols demonized by institutional religion. At the core of this spiritual lineage is the constant tension between exoteric dogma and esoteric truth, between public morality and private gnosis. Whether through Adam Kadmon, the archetype of divine unity, or the dual hands of Christ and Lucifer, humanity's religious story is not a linear battle of good versus evil, but a spiraling Ouroboros of light and shadow, knowledge and faith, power and surrender. In tracing this esoteric thread, we discover not the death of old gods, but their transformation, masked, renamed, and reinterpreted in the endless pursuit of divine connection.